So I didn't want to leave you hanging here on the last lesson of this particular course. I wanted to show you the last step, and that would be to actually deploy a website out to a live web server. And so I chose to use Microsoft Azure App Services, which is a relatively new service from Microsoft. It actually combines several different pieces that have been around for several years, but they kind of put them under one umbrella, which they called Azure App Services. The portion of Azure App Services we're going to use was formerly known as Azure Websites. Now they call them web apps. And essentially what we'll be able to do is deploy our application using Visual Studio's tools, and there's a wizard, and you'll see how that all comes together and makes it extremely easy to deploy our application. And we'll be deploying to a virtual machine that Microsoft configures and Microsoft manages. And so when we have less responsibility and less control over the environment, and Microsoft's doing a lot of the managing and even gives us some functionality above and beyond what you would normally get by deploying to a simple web server, that's typically called Platform as a Service, or PaaS, P-A-A-S. There's also another offering, or a series of offerings from Microsoft, called Infrastructure as a Service, as it gets to the categorization. And that's essentially when you are deploying to virtual machines in the cloud that you manage. So they'll install the operating system for you, but from that point on, you make the backups, you worry about patches, things of that nature. So the good thing about Platform as a Service is that you're responsible for less. They take care of a lot of the dirty work. Of course, you have less control over the environment. So if you're willing to give that up, then you're probably in good shape. Microsoft says that over 99% of all websites that are being deployed out to the cloud could really utilize the Platform as a Service, or rather what was formerly Azure Websites but now is Azure App Services web apps to deploy applications. You just don't typically need access to the actual computer where your website will be deployed. You would only need that in certain situations where you've got a complicated website, a legacy website that needs specific components that have to be installed on the same computer, and there's maybe some more resources that must be installed on that same computer as well. That's very few cases would require something like that. So you should really give if you're going to be hosting applications, web applications on a Microsoft platform, definitely want to take a look at Azure App Services. Are they the cheapest? Probably not. Are they the most reliable? Maybe not. But are they the most convenient from Visual Studio? Definitely, definitely. So at any rate, Azure App Services kind of combines several pieces together, like I said a moment ago. It combines together what was formerly Azure Websites, which was their web hosting platform as a service, something called Azure Mobile Services, which allowed developers, front-end developers for iOS, Android, Windows Phone, or Windows Desktop, really any platform, to make calls into web services to save data, to create notifications, to be sent out to mobile devices, and I think that they have some API management. There's several other pieces, some scheduled background tasks that could be run, things of that nature. And then there's also something that they've added to it called Logic Apps, which essentially allow you to stitch together different APIs without having to write code in order to enable some workflow. So I think they give an example where every time you tweet something, it also gets posted to Facebook. It's one of their examples on their website, but you get the idea. Basically, you just drag and drop components, configure a few settings, wire it up, and then you're ready to go. Okay, so just to recap that portion of it, we're only going to use the websites portion, or rather the web apps portion of Azure App Services. We're going to publish our website out to Azure. It'll host our website on a virtual machine that Microsoft manages completely. The cool thing about Azure App Services web apps is that not only can you run ASP.NET, but you can also run classic ASP, PHP, Java apps, Node.js apps, Python apps, and so on. You can also scale up. Now we're going to deploy to a free plan. There's not a lot of options there, but if we're willing to pay a little bit more money, we can scale up and say, okay, I can see as I look at the console in Azure, how popular my website's becoming, and I see that so many requests have come in that some users are experiencing timeouts. So maybe I should just take this little slider control that says I only have one instance of my website running and run a second instance of my website, or 4 instances, or up to 10 instances of my website. So up to 10 different virtual machines are hosting your website, handling all the traffic that comes in. There's a traffic manager that is distributing the traffic between all of the virtual machines to make sure that everybody who's visiting your website gets a quick, speedy response. You only need to do that, though, if you're under really heavy load. You'll know when you'll need it. There are also things like web jobs that are back-end tasks. So you could create a console application and say, I only want this to run every 10 minutes, or I want this to run every time that there's an update to a database, and it will perform some logic, any C# logic that you write. There's also backups available, web server logging, monitoring of your application to make sure and to know when it goes down. So for example, I have a monitor on a little app that I'm running to tell me that every time in Amsterdam when the response is less than, I don't know what it was, 100 milliseconds, that I want it to be notified. So once every 4 or 5 days I get a notification in the middle of the night that the connection from Amsterdam to my Azure website, now Azure App Service website, is slow, but it tends to go away after 2 or 3 minutes. But that's an example of monitoring. And essentially, like I said, and you'll see in a moment, you can do almost anything you want to do in the websites portion of Azure App Services. Anything that you would want to do, and maybe that you've been accustomed to working with Internet Information Services. The difference is that there are fewer knobs and levers that you can turn. So again, you can deploy to many different machines by just using a slider control, or just choosing something from a drop-down list box, instead of having to configure all that yourself. So you can be up and running very fast, and that's why I say it's convenient, even if it's not the cheapest or the most reliable necessarily. Although you can increase reliability by adding more instances of your application on multiple virtual machines. I'll show you some of that as we tour Azure in just a moment here. Also, you might be thinking, well, Bob, why are you doing this? This is going to cost me money in addition to what I'm paying for LearnVisualStudio.net. Well, first of all, everybody can try out Azure for free. You get $200 credit, or 1 month, whichever comes first, whichever runs out first. So everybody can try it for free without a credit card, I believe. If you have an MSDN subscription or access to one, you get so many free credits per month. As a Microsoft, yes, most valuable professional, I get so many per month. If you're part of the BizSpark program, I don't know if that's even still existing, but used to, if you're BizSpark, so you're a small company and you base all of your applications on Microsoft technologies, they give you like 3 years for free, and then if your company succeeds, obviously they're wanting you to buy more services from them. DreamSpark, which is for students. If you're a student, check out DreamSpark, search for it, and become a member of it, and you'll get a lot of access for free. I think you have to be a student at a high school or university that they recognize. So there are a lot of ways to get free access to Azure. And yeah, you could deploy this website to a host like GoDaddy or some other dedicated web server that you control. But the problem with that is, first of all, it's not as convenient, and Azure is going to continue to be a big deal from Microsoft's perspective, because it's how they're going to price, or how their business model is going to change over time. You're going to see less emphasis on selling software and more emphasis on licensing services or monthly recurring services like Azure to host websites and to do different sorts of things. Office 365, another example where you're no longer buying the software, you're renting it month to month. And so that's how they see the future panning out. So a lot of investment, a lot of time being sunk into Azure, and I think it's pretty important for you to keep up with that. I don't know if I mentioned this already, I don't think I did, but I did 100 videos for Microsoft Virtual Academy on Azure recently, and I would point you to that. Take a look at the URL on screen. You can find a link that will point you to all those. We'll wind up covering a lot of that same material, updated here on learnvisualstudio.net and probably go in more intricate detail in some cases where I think it's more important. Microsoft told me what they wanted, and I went off and built the content that they wanted, but I didn't get to build some of the content that I wanted to build, so we'll do that here in LVS. But at any rate, you may want to check that out. It's free, it's available online, and we'll cover some of those things later. But at any rate, the point that I was trying to make is that things change so dramatically that literally week to week, as I was recording content, they would release something new that would obsolete something that I just talked about a day or two ago in recording videos. It was very frustrating, but finally got through it. But under heavy development, constant changes. So the things that we do here might change slightly, if they were to release new tools or new options. So I'll try to keep up with that. Remind me in the comments if things don't look quite right when you're using Visual Studio 2013 Express for Web or 2015 or something after that, and I'll try to address it. Now, the one thing that I want you to do before we get too far here is I want you to click the little notification flag up in the toolbar, and there might be a notification that there's a new SDK, at least version, an Azure SDK version 2.5.1 or greater. I want you to install that now. So pause the video and make sure you have that installed, or else you're not going to see what I see on my screen. Okay. All right. So with all those caveats in place, and I'm going to trust that you've already you've gone out to the Azure website, you create an account, you have your login information, maybe you tried for free, and you signed up, going through this process. I'm going to assume that you've got an account and you know how to log into it, but nothing else needs to be set up at this point. You've got billing set up, things of that nature. You're ready to go. So what we're going to do now that you have that set up is deploy this application out to Azure. Let's right-click on the project, Local DB Example, and select Publish. And this will bring up the Publish Web dialog. And there's a couple of different options here, but what we want to choose is the Microsoft Azure Web Apps option. Now, here I would have to sign in or import a subscription. Let's just use the sign in option. That'll bring up a nice big form here, and I'll type in my own username and click continue, and after a moment it's going to make me use my password. Click sign in there. Whoops. I think I changed it right after I recorded that series, just in case I accidentally added it to the video and somebody saw it. Alright, so it's going to ask if we want to add this to an existing web app or create a new web app. I'm going to go ahead and create a new web app, and we're going to call this Local DB Example. If we give it a second, it'll take a look and make sure that's available, and it is. Now, in the Microsoft Virtual Academy videos, I talk about service plans and resource groups. They're really not critical here for our purposes, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. Just go ahead and follow along, create a new one with me, call it something. I don't think you're going to be able to call whatever I name things, you're not going to be able to name it. I know that's absolutely true for the web app name. Not so sure about the app service plan, but let's just go something like Local DB Example service plan, and then the same thing for a resource group. Don't want to talk about what those are. It's not really all that important for small applications. Resource group. Okay. And then we're going to select a region. I'm going to choose East US because I think that's the closest data center to where I'm at. And we're going to choose to create a new server for our database. And servers have to be all lowercase. If you don't put it all in lowercase with no special characters, you're going to get an error whenever we move on from here. So let me just give it the name Local DB Example. Again, I think you may have to call yours something different. And I'll create a user and a password. And I'll click create. All right, so right now it's going out and provisioning a new app service web app space for me to deploy to, and it's also going out, I believe, and provisioning a new SQL database server on Azure for us. Okay, so first of all, we're going to look at publishing to our Azure, to our App Services website, and we can choose different deployment methods. Web deploys just fine. We'll talk about the differences between the different publish methods in the ASP.NET Web Form series. We also let it fill in the site name and the password that we typed in, and I'm just going to go ahead and click Validate Connection to make sure we're good to go there. And we are, so I'll click the next button. And here we need to choose a configuration setting. We haven't talked about configurations in Visual Studio. Just go ahead and let's leave it at the release option. There are some additional options here. If we're republishing our application a second time, we have changes. We can do things like exclude files, remove additional files at destination if we've deleted some from the new version of our project. We can also do a pre-compilation during publishing. Notice that it's going to change the data source on the destination, Azure App Services destination, to point to the database out in Azure as well. Let's go ahead and click Next. Here we can see all the files that are going to be uploaded to our new web app. Now it says that there's no database that's selected to publish. I think I may need to do the update database. Let's try that. Yeah, okay. So I needed to do that. We can even click Preview the database. And there's some good news and there's some bad news about publishing from Visual Studio using Web Deploy. You'll see that it's going to show us that it's going to create the database schema for us, but it's not going to copy in any rows of data that we currently have in our database tables. We'd have to run a second script, so we'd have to include a script along with all of this script to execute. So I think that's one of the things that we can configure here. Configure database updates. We can add a SQL script that'll actually do the insertions of the existing rows, but we would have to generate those somehow, and I don't want to do that for this example. But that's just one shortcoming of this whole publishing process. So I'm going to go ahead and click the Publish button now, and it's going to take a few moments. And after it has finished, it launches Internet Explorer and it opens it up to the URL for our application, and we can see that our application is indeed running live out on the internet, localdbexample.azurewebsites.net. Now, we'll take a look in a moment that we can point any domain name to that. We just have to set it up on the in the portal. Let's go ahead and try out our application and make sure it works at this point. So we've tried Bob, Steve, and Richard. Let's put in Conrad. And we'll click Save Data, and it seems like it works. Very cool. Okay, so I'm going to shut this down for now. And we're back into Visual Studio, and what I want to do is go over to the Server Explorer, and I just want to see my SQL databases out on Azure. Now you might be asked to log in 1 or 2 times during this whole process, just to let you know. In this case, I want to look at the local DB example, so I'm going to right click it and select Open in SQL Server Object Explorer. That pops open a new tab. It asks if I want to add a firewall rule. This will allow my local computer to access my Azure SQL database. So let's go ahead and select Add Firewall Rule. And so now let's drill in and let's take a look at the tables. Give it a second here to catch up. And you can see we have our DBO customers. I'm going to right click and select View Data. And you can see that we see Conrad. So we're actually working with that same SQL Server Data Tools view of our database. We could add new rows right here if we wanted to, and so on. Let's go ahead and shut that down. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about before we leave Visual Studio and go into the Azure portal is there's something you really need to be aware of. And so when I distribute this project to you, I'm going to delete this Publish Profiles folder. This Publish Profiles actually stores all of your private information in it, including your password. So you need to make sure that you don't distribute this to somebody else that you want to show your code to, because then they would be able to access your Azure account and be able to deploy their own services to it, maybe even lock you out. So you want to make sure that you delete this. Now there's a way that you can point to, like for example, if you wanted to check this into a source control system like Git or on GitHub, for example, there's a way that you can point to a local file for the published profiles, but never actually send the published profile up to Git. So everybody would have to create their own, deploy it to their own Azure account, not use yours. And again, I spent a lot of time or several lessons on that particular topic on the Microsoft Virtual Academy videos. So if you're anxious to watch those, again, point you to this URL on screen. Okay, so let me do this. I'm going to right click and select delete while I'm thinking about this, and to remove that so that I don't distribute that to you and you hack my Azure account. So now let's go to the Azure portal and let's see what actually was created for us. I'm already logged in, so it's going to bring us to the start page that displays all of my Azure services. Now this is what I would call the existing or the old portal. There's also a new preview portal. By the time you watch this lesson, what you see might be dramatically different from what we see here. I'll show you that in just a moment. But as I record this, this is the production version of the Azure portal. So that's what I'm going to teach you right now. So you can see that I have two apps. Now there's a little app I created, heroversusrobot.net. It's hosted at www.heroversusrobot.net. Then there's this other local DB example. Hey, that's ours, that we just deployed a moment ago. And it can be found at that URL that we looked at. Let's go ahead and drill into that and take a look at what we see. Here we get some monitoring of CPU usage and things of that nature. We also can get some more in-depth monitoring that we can configure here in the Monitor tab. We don't have any background web jobs, but if we did, we could add them here. Here on the Configure tab, we can decide what we want to enable on that server. So for example, if there's a reason why we want to use an older version of .NET, maybe we have an application that targets an older version, we can set that. We can set the version of PHP and Java and Python. There are also, we can set whether we want to allow WebSockets or not, whether we want to allow editing in Visual Studio Online. That's a big topic, but I don't want to talk about it right now. Here we can set up domains, so I could point, for example, www.localdbexample.com to this Azure web app. If I wanted to, I would just set it up here. I could also set up any SSL bindings, so I could upload say, for example, I purchase an SSL certificate and I get it into their correct format, I can add it here. And so I could allow https://www.localdbexample.com in order to create a secure connection with that web server. And there are other things like, let's see, yeah, you can turn on diagnostics at the site and server level. You can also create app settings. Now notice that here we have the connection string. It's very much like an app setting, which you would see in the web config. Here's a special section of app settings, which is connection strings, and here is the secure connection string for that SQL database that we deploy. We'll look at in just a moment. Now I could open up and show it to you. It'll show that entire connection string, but I don't want to show it for obvious reasons. And there's some other things here that you might be able to set if you're familiar with Internet Information Services and you want to change default documents, handler settings, and virtual apps and directories. The next tab is the interesting one, the Scale tab. So by default, it's going to deploy your application out into a free pricing tier, which means you're on a server with thousands of other websites potentially. And after a while, if nobody hits your website, it'll be kind of removed temporarily from the active web servers that have been provisioned for this purpose. There, you get a limited number of data per day and limited number of page views per day with the free plan. And that might be perfect for your purposes, just for testing and development like we're doing right here. But at some point you might want to move up to the basic or standard. That gets you off of a shared account, and it gives you more options as well. In fact, the basic and standard will put you on your own virtual machine, so you're not sharing with a virtual machine with somebody else. And the difference between basic and standard is how many servers you can scale up to. So for example, if you see here, right now we have a single instance of our web app running. We could change that if we were running on one of these other shared basic or standard to like 3 instances. Now if I try to do that, it's not going to let me here because I don't have the right plan in place. So it says with a standard web app, you can configure autoscale and spend only as much as you need for your service. So autoscale allows you to allow Azure to watch how much your website is being used and only add additional instances as they're needed. So you'll only pay for 2 or 3 or 5 instances for a limited period of time. Say, for example, you had a big marketing campaign, or you got slash-dotted or things of that nature. You would be able to say, yeah, go ahead and scale me as needed, but scale me back down when I don't need all that capacity anymore. And also the last thing I'll show you is that you can create automated backups from here as well, which are pretty neat. So that's just standard functionality to a lot of web hosts. All right, so that is our web server portion. Let's look at our SQL database. Here you can see I also have a Hero versus Robot database for use in that application, but here's my local DB example _DB. And right now, if we go to the Configure tab, you can see that I'm using, so I'm using the web service tier, which is like almost free. I think it is free. To get more features, I would have to upgrade this database to basic, standard, or premium. If you're ever wondering how much things cost, just take a look at pricing. Like I think you just go azure.com/pricing, and you should be able to get there. Well, if you can't, here, just click on the pricing option. Oh, it's English US pricing. Okay. And choose the service that you want to look at, like we're looking at Azure App Services or SQL databases. And it'll explain the difference between the tiers, not only in terms of what you get, but also what the pricing is, and then also usually a calculator so that you can figure out how much you would use in an FAQ. Okay, so at any rate, I think that's all I really wanted to say about this. We could continue to make changes to our application and then continue to right-click and select deploy, or publish rather, to go through this process again, and it would only update those things that have changed with our application. All right, so that was another long lesson, but hopefully that was beneficial. A quick, easy way to deploy your website. There are more options. You can deploy to another web host. You can deploy to your own servers that you host, whether on your own premise or in some other data center. But Visual Studio can publish to those as well. It just makes publishing to Azure so darn easy, and I thought we could all share that common experience since Azure is available to everybody. Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps it up. Let's move on and do our last big project together, our last big challenge, and then we're done with this course. See you there. Thanks.